Welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have a great one for you tonight. As I mentioned many times over the years, how I believe that Ariel, the Ariel phenomenon, school phenomenon or incident, whatever you want to say, back in 1994, I believe it as the most credible case with those school children. And I have Gunter, who arrived pretty early on in the scene with Cynthia Hind. He's going to be on with us tonight. Our blog this week is UFOs over Mushells, Scotland by Charles Lear. Those are made into an audio blog as well. You can see them here on our channel. And as I mentioned last week at the end of the show, that if you've had a really incredible UFO sighting, please do get a hold of me. I'd like to start doing those 15-minute or so or less clips on just encounters. And you get a hold of me at martin@podcastufo.com. And I think I'm about ready. I do want to thank everyone that supports the show. Anyone can do that. And that information's over at Patreon or podcastufo.com right there on our website. And here he is, Gunter. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Martin. Great to meet you guys. And I hope, we have a fantastic evening today. Really a pleasure to be on your show, and greetings to all the people who are watching today.
Yes, thank you, Gunter. So, Gunter, you've had a very amazing career because as soon as you really got into the UFO topic, you jumped right in and you were involved right away. And I see, is this your photography behind you that I'm looking at?
Yes, what's behind me is my astrophotography. It's just a hobby of mine that I do.
Just beautiful. Wow. Yeah, very, very nice. And so do you ever display that anywhere, like on a website or anything like that?
Yes, I do. I have a website called ghofer.com.
Ah, okay. All right. Well, I hope people visit it because these are really incredible images. So I want to ask you, first of all, what got you interested in the topic of UFOs to begin with?
Well, it started out in my teen years when my father was reading Cynthia's book, this one here,
Yeah.
African Encounters, which people may know about. And I just saw it on the bookshelf and I picked it up, and it caught my imagination and my interest because it wasn't like a science fiction book. These were real events that Cynthia was investigating in Southern Africa, basically Zimbabwe, South Africa, that region. And obviously I started reading more into it. And then one day I had a more personal event happen when I was reading a UFO book, and my grandmother spotted me reading. I was just sitting down on the table reading, and she said, "I saw one of those things." And I said, "What do you mean you saw one of these things?" And she said, "Oh, in 1968, she saw what looked like two soup plates inverted over each other, which is a typical disc-shaped object, in a town called, where was it? Sipolilo that's the northwest of Zimbabwe. She had a little shop there, she said, in 1968. And at that time, there was a bit of civil war in Zimbabwe. That time it was called Rhodesia. And they saw a light in the distance. She was closing the shop up, and the security guard with her saw this light in the distance approaching them. And she thought, oh, maybe it was a helicopter or airplane because of the war going on. And as it got closer, she was a bit puzzled because there was no sound. And when it got really close, she saw it was a very unusual shape. It was a black disc-like object with a very intense bright light underneath it. And it seemed to be coming like if to come down to land, not far from them, virtually at tree height, probably 100 feet away or less. And the people in the village where she was staying started getting excited because they had never seen an object like this. So they started shouting and pointing and all that. And suddenly the object just took off at, 45 degrees and shot off at an extreme rate of speed and disappeared.
That sounds like a pretty good one.
Yeah,
So that must have shocked you. I mean, you're
yeah.
sitting here.
I mean, all these years I'd known her, and she never told me anything until she saw me reading the book.
You know,
And of course,
I find that if when I'm out there in the general public, if the topic happens to come up, and I say, well, I do a show on UFOs or whatever, and or somehow that I bring it up or whatever it is, and you'd be surprised at how many people have seen something. It seems
I,
like there's a pretty high percentage of our
mhm.
society that says, "Oh yeah, I saw something I couldn't explain."
Yes,
You
that's
know, and
absolutely true. I've just randomly had people talk to me that they've seen these objects just because I've shown an interest.
Mhm.
But they would kind of dismiss it and say, I saw this thing, but I just couldn't accept it, or they just dismissed it as just some unusual light, and that was that.
Mhm.
It's only when years later someone was talking about the subject and they said, you know what, I saw this thing and I couldn't figure out what it was, and it was just still to this day, it still kind of like disturbs them because it just doesn't quite figure with anything they've seen.
Yeah, yeah. So, and you also got into doing some, because I know right away when the Ariel incident happened, you were there with some type of homemade Geiger counter type of thing, right? I mean, you got interested in that aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously before going to Ariel, I was helping Cynthia with some of her investigations,
Ah,
and how I got involved with Cynthia. Obviously, I read her book, and there was a postal address which you could write letters to her,
hmm,
and if you had a case or wanted to know information, etc. So I wrote to her saying I had this device that might help with maybe some of your investigations. I'd made a device that picked up electrostatic fields. So if there's a object with a lot of electrical field or magnetic field, it could pick it up. So I thought maybe that might work. So she got interested and contacted me after that. And I made some devices which I gave her because there was a case she was investigating where someone was having like encounters in their house, like something
mhm,
was coming in their room at night.
hmm.
And so this person took the device to his room to see if they had any reaction. But I can't remember if there was a reaction or anything after that, or if he had another encounter.
Hmm.
And so I became, so Cynthia kind of like asked me if I'd be interested in getting involved, being part of her team and get involved in helping investigations, etc. So I agreed, and I used to help her, like maybe take some photographs or bring some of the equipment along, or just come along for the investigation and just take in information or listening to the witnesses that she used to interview. And of course, every year she had I think every quarterly or 6 months, depending on how much news, because she was part of MUFON,
Hmm.
investigator, she used to get information. And when she had enough information, she would bring in to us and do a presentation to a few members of the public, maybe like half a dozen people were invited to her home. And she would give a little talk and presentation of what she heard and listened to and information she got from MUFON from cases around the world. Because at
Hmm.
that time, you have to remember, we didn't have the internet. There was just maybe telephone or
Yeah.
occasional books and letters from people, correspondence, that kind of thing. So things were kind of slower moving. So Cynthia kind of collected the information over the year and then did a presentation to a few people. And if she had big cases, she would go out and do presentations to the public, um, maybe once every 2 years or so.
Now, when you would go out with her on these cases, what was some of the earlier ones that you did? Did you do some prior to the Ariel incident?
There were some prior to the Ariel. I remember going um, to a town, I think it was Bindura, if I'm right. And we had an interesting case there because we had a young boy who was studying at night time, and he heard this clicking sound every couple of minutes outside his window because he was doing studying late at night. So he switched off the light because he was a bit puzzled about the sound that was coming outside, because there's a road that went almost like a roundabout in his area, and there was a school across the other side. So he went out, and there was a little bush or hedge, and he was hiding it to look what was causing this clicking sound, because he thought someone was coming along making funny noises. And what he encountered was absolutely, well, he was kind of terrified, because what he saw was a small being with some kind of rucksack, some kind of suit, and it had some kind of aerial coming out of the light, and some kind of beeping sound emanating from this device. And around the whole creature, there was a rainbow pearl of light kind of effect around it, like almost some kind of field around this creature. And across the road, the security guard at the school witnessed the same thing. And we tried to get the security guard, but the security guard was terrified to come forward to tell us about it. And the young boy described that it left kind of foot marks in the ground. They were like a pattern of 5, because it was a dirt road. It wasn't tarred, so he could see the actual impressions in the ground. So he just drew an impression on the ground of 5 kind of footsteps.
Wow. So like in a pattern of 5, you're saying?
Yeah, like if it's some kind of boot, I don't know, whatever the footwear, or if it had kind of footwear, if it was at the feet, I'm not sure, created this 5 pattern print on the ground. Yeah. But we didn't actually see it because we only met the boy weeks afterwards, because he wrote to Cynthia,
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Things go so slowly that way,
Yeah, those days was very slow.
Yeah.
And in Zimbabwe, some of the cases are rural, so sometimes you get the information maybe weeks. Some of them are much older, years even, depending.
At the time, how far away were you from where the Ariel school was?
Ariel school is about 22 kilometers from the capital of Harare, where we were based, which is about 14 miles roughly away. Yeah. So it's not too far away.
Right, really close.
And yeah, so how Cynthia got to hear about it initially was Tim Leach. You may remember the BBC photographer, cameraman. Got a picture of him. Yeah,
he was a war photographer. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
and he phoned Cynthia. He found her, and he said, do you know there was a landing at a school called Ariel just outside Harare, and he had spoken to the headmaster, and the kids had some of the parents apparently phoned the BBC, and that's how he got involved in that. So this was on the 16th of September, 1994. He called Cynthia on Friday, late afternoon or early evening. And then after that, Cynthia phoned me to let me know, because she arranged to go to the school, because it was a Friday, and all the school was closed for the weekend. So we only could get to the school the following week. And we went on the Tuesday, the 20th of September. Yeah. So from there, we proceeded to, we went to the BBC, myself, Cynthia, and she had 2 colleagues, and one of them was her son. He helped out carrying some of the equipment that we had there. Yeah.
So what was it like walking? Let's just focus on that for a little while. So what was it like walking into the schoolyard and starting to hear some of, I don't know if she did all her interviews right there in front of you or some of them, or what was all that like for you?
The initial, well, for me, I didn't know what to expect because I've heard of some encounters, but nothing like this.
Yeah.
So it was quite a new kind of experience for me, for myself. So I didn't know what to expect really. And Cynthia was a little bit excited as well, and fascinated because she never had something this big on her doorstep, literally.
Right.
Um, so we were there with the BBC. So Tim was filming. We went into the school, and the headmaster had already had a few kids in the office, and on the table there was a few of the images that the children had drawn the previous day, I believe, so that they had it all fresh in memory. So we wanted them. Cynthia actually asked him so the kids to sit individually and draw what they saw. So when she came, she could have a look through the images that they had created.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it was fascinating to see all the images. A lot of them had very similar drawings of the craft between the trees,
Mm.
and some of them showed three craft, you know, in the sky flying. And there's even, I think I saw two that mentioned that even on Thursday, the day before, there was something visible. So they showed a little drawing where they said Thursday we saw this object, and then on Friday they had the main event. So there's actually the event didn't actually only happen on the Friday the 16th, but also on the Thursday the 15th there was a sighting where some of the kids saw a cigar-shaped object flying.
This is a part of the story that I have never heard.
Hmm.
So that's really interesting. And then the other thing that I find really fascinating is some of the kids have, and I believe I'm trying to think who I had. One of the kids that I had on in Madagascar. What's his name?
Oh, I think I know. It's not Francis.
Yes,
Uh,
Francis.
is it
Francis
Francis?
was saying that he saw these like little orbs or something spinning around the object, which is quite fascinating. And I think a few
Yes.
other people saw something like that.
Yes, because what the kids were describing, they saw like I mentioned, the main object, and then they saw a few smaller objects flying with that.
Yeah.
And some of the kids were it described it in a very interesting way how this object moved, and I can't. This is what made it more fascinating for me. That when they saw the objects flying, some of the kids they said the objects flew and then disappeared, reappeared, disappeared, reappeared somewhere else. So it wasn't like it was moving along. It kind of like appeared, disappeared, reappeared over here, disappeared and reappeared over here, and then landed. And some of the kids said they were the main landing there, and then there was another landing a little bit further out. So we went on the day when we went to talk to the kids and had the interviews. Two kids, myself and Tim, went with them, and they were showing us the area where they thought the main landing was, because a lot of the kids were on the edge of the field because there's a boundary. They had put some
Yes.
logs between the rough savanna kind of grass going into bush,
Yeah.
tree shrub in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And they said it landed somewhere just beyond the brush. And the kids were all standing by the logs, excited, seeing this object and seeing two creatures, beings appear from there. Some of the kids describe them large heads with tight fitting black suits, large oval eyes, and some of them even described the long hair. So I did a mock drawing at the time of that, and this is kind of what I had.
Oh yeah, wow. How about that? You
This
did
is
that
actually,
at the time?
yeah, at the time. In fact, I gave this to John Mack
Yeah.
because he put his notes here, because he came in November and he put November, from Gunter Hofer, description. Yeah.
Were you actually there when John Mack was there?
Yes.
Oh
Yeah.
wow, that
We
must have been
had,
exciting to see that, him
yeah.
interview those kids.
Yeah. I remember when he came, he had interviewed a couple of kids. One of them was Liesel, as you may know,
Yeah.
the little girl who talked about the effect on the environment, etc.
Right.
When she
Yeah.
was looking at the eyes of the creatures, because somehow Mac was able to get them to convey their feelings.
Right.
And I think no one was listening to their feelings. Everyone was just interested in what did you see, what did it look like,
Yeah.
the nuts and bolts kind of stuff,
Right.
but not going into the emotions and the internal experiences the children were having at the time, and what it made them feel.
Yeah.
So,
He was so good at it too. He'd scoot right down to their level
oh
and
yes,
make them feel comfortable.
hmm
And yeah, he was really, really good at that.
yeah, he was very gentle.
Yeah.
He didn't lead them. He just kind of asked them, "What did you feel?" What
Yes.
when they described the creature with the eyes looking at them, why did it? Were you scared? Um, you know, kind of like almost subconsciously bringing out the information that they kind of felt. And it was very interesting. Why did they come out with this feeling of the environment, issues of technology, being harmful to people, etc.
Right.
So,
And the thing, someone else pointed out to me that after watching Randall Nickerson's movie um, that you were involved in as well, they said that there was never a message of how to fix anything, only that kind of like this is happening or this is to come type of thing, and not
mhm,
not offering anything other than this is here. This could happen or is going to happen one way or the other or something,
that's
which
right.
is
It's hard to. I mean, even people always say, uh, "Where are the aliens?" They haven't landed on the House lawn. They don't hover over cities and announce themselves, etc. Um, because obviously with this whole disclosure program, people are looking for answers from government. Do you have craft hidden, or you have video footage and all that kind of thing?
Mhm.
But in the end, you know, doesn't matter how good the video is, people will debunk them these days, saying they are CGI, or it was manipulated, or it was some government secret program. And the only time people will believe it is you have the physical evidence here, literally in front of them.
Right. Here's an interesting question, and I agree with any type of question of asking this. Do you happen to know if any of the children reported any type of odor when they're being secured?
Not as far as I'm aware of. The only thing I've heard of is people hearing a slight, like whistling sound
Yes. Yeah.
that they heard.
Like a flute.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like a flute sound. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And yeah.
and because the 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 Francis, I don't know if he mentioned to you that when he described also how the aliens moved was also
And they
very
blinked,
strange.
blinked in
They
and
kind
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they almost like the craft. How the craft came, the aliens were moving not like how we move. They just kind of like appeared, disappeared, and then appeared over here. You know, it's almost like their motion is different to how we move, or
And
the
very
technology they're using to move is different.
yeah. Or yeah, I mean, we may not be able to understand how they do anything. And
Yeah,
another thing is, when you talk about the blinking in and out, I can't help but think of, could this be an interdimensional type of situation? I mean, nothing's taken off the table when it comes to
I
something like
always I always hold my hands up in the air and I say I don't know.
that's the best thing to say.
I really don't know how they
Yeah,
do it, how
yeah,
it's done. You can only imagine, um, someone from the Stone Age looking at us today, driving in a car, and that
yeah,
person trying to describe it to his people in
yeah.
whatever language they would have in the Stone Age. They wouldn't believe him. It would be too fanciful.
Or flying in a plane or jet, or yeah,
Yeah, yeah, those were the gods flying up there. I
yeah.
saw thunder and lightning. It was a jet flying past. That kind of thing.
That's right.
So they'll use the language of the time, and we are doing the same. We can only describe it with the knowledge, the physics, and the science we understand currently.
That's
Obviously,
right.
if there's new physics and new technologies that we don't know what's going to be in the next 100,000 billion years. If there's civilization a billion years ahead of us, their technology would be purely magic to us, purely magic.
Right. And also the way of thinking, we always try to, use our terms of thought, but we have absolutely no idea what type of thought, whether we'd only be guessing, I
Yeah,
mean, and that would be like right now, if we went and visited a life on another planet, in another galaxy or a part of our galaxy, but thousands of light years away or whatever, and we landed on their planet, we would have no idea how they think unless we could
yeah,
observe them and try to figure it out. But
yeah,
I mean, I hope this we're not, all the living beings out there aren't warring and tribal,
yes,
you
yes.
know.
We pray. I mean, maybe they're so far ahead of us that they just look at us like ants. Like
Yeah,
we just walk about. We don't see the ants as a threat whatsoever.
yeah.
Until there's so many of them, and then we kind of stamp our legs and crush a few of them,
Uh-oh.
because they get in the way, and then
Yeah,
there's a problem. Then the ants all get agitated. The gods got angry and crushed us, that
yeah.
kind of thing.
I hope that
Uh,
doesn't happen.
yeah, I don't hope we don't agitate them. Maybe we are. Who knows?
Yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
when it comes to nuclear warheads and things like that. Um,
yeah, it seems interesting. They're going when I hear about the reports of these UFO encounters near silos, nuclear
yeah,
facilities, etc. Like they deliberately keeping an eye on them. Like, are these objects, are these weapons safe? They're not, rusting and about to explode or something. Like they're just deliberately taking stock of what's going on because they can't have the experiment contaminated, that kind of thing.
now, when you were doing the research with Cynthia Hind, I'm going to pop this question up from someone in chat. Jim wanted to know, do you know anything about the other witnesses who saw the beings off the school grounds? Did she do any of that type of research as well?
Well, she had conversations with some people who described seeing, I think, in the evening of the on that Friday, if I'm right. Someone was driving on the road near Rua there by the school, and they crashed because they saw what they described like dead people walking towards him on the road,
Hmm.
which is the big head and the eyes.
Yeah.
So they described looked like a skull, because of the big head and the eyes. So he crashed, and the person was unconscious for some time. We don't know how
Wow.
long,
Wow.
and then they went back. So that was one of the reports. I believe maybe one of the teachers said they saw a light,
Hmm.
as well over some of the areas, because we never had any adults seeing the craft at the school, because at the time the staff were all in a meeting while the kids were out playing, and the only adult on the ground was the lady who was manning the tuck shop, which is a little shop where kids buy some sweets and biscuits and drinks and things like that. And some of the older kids ran over to say, Miss, there's something going on down here. You have to come and see. And she just ignored them and said, oh no, you guys are just pulling my leg, that kind of thing. So
Well,
she didn't go.
supposedly one of the teachers came forward a few years ago and said that she actually did see it. Did you ever hear about this? This was a few years ago.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Maybe because now I'm here, I don't get the opportunity to speak to them.
In England. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm kind of like a bit out of touch with the event since I left Zimbabwe in that respect.
Yeah. Yeah. How long have you been away from there?
I've left Zimbabwe in 2001. That's when I left Zimbabwe. So I've been here a while now, 22 years now.
Yeah. And how many times did you go to the school after the incident?
I went there at least twice. I went after the initial investigation where Cynthia and the BBC were there. I went out with a work colleague to do just I think it was maybe a few days after, because there was just so much activity with distractions. I never had the time to really scan the ground without the, people calling me and doing this. And we had such limited time after interviewing the kids and seeing a little bit of the grounds that were allowed. I managed to go there on a weekend, on a Saturday, to just look over the places where the kids said they saw the other craft land, because where the main craft landed near the trees, the ground was very hard, so I couldn't see any impressions there. But then the other kids said they saw something land more to the left in the grass. So I went down that way, and I did find 2 oval impressions, one large one and one smaller one.
Wow.
Which I made a crude map at the time to help me. So here's the school up here, and then down.
Hang on just a minute. Let me do this. There you go.
So this is the school up here where the kids were observing the main craft over here in red. We are marked in red here. And then I went to walk down to find out where the other kids said they saw some other craft. And I found these 2 oval impressions, one large oval which crossed the path and a smaller one next to it. And the grass, the savanna grass, was kind of flattened in I think a clockwise manner,
Like there was some type of rotation possibly?
Yeah, it seemed like there could have been some kind of rotation or whatever caused it to rotate in that manner,
Yeah.
And I did find some impressions there in the ground. I found a wedge-shaped, triangular-shaped impression in the ground, which is about 15 centimeters long, roughly, I would say.
So it could have been landing gear, possibly?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Possibly.
And here's oh, yes. Did you take any readings from those impressions?
I did take some readings. I had a homemade Geiger counter because at the time in Zimbabwe, getting access to Geiger counters was really difficult. I went to the university to find out if they had a Geiger counter, which they did, but it was non-functional. It wasn't working. So I had built my own Geiger counter, from, I think there was a Radio Shack diagram in a magazine of homemade Geiger counter you could build, which I did build. And I took it to the school, but I don't think my Geiger counter was sensitive enough if there was something slightly above average reading in the environment. So I didn't actually read anything abnormal. I also brought along a metal detector and my electrostatic detector as well, just in case there was something else.
Wow.
We did take a I did take soil samples from the ovals that I discovered, and gave them to Cynthia to have them analyzed. There wasn't anything unusual about the soil samples from what I gathered.
Hmm. So, how far away would you say the ovals were from where the kids actually had their encounter with the beings? I know Selma Siddick, for one, was only 4 feet or so away from one of the beings.
Yes, I remember describing it literally in front of her. Um, the craft that or the landing marks I discovered later when I had the time to, explore the field area, were probably 200 meters further away to the left from the main experience, which was more to the right.
Uh-huh. Now, this just occurred to me. Are you going to be involved in any of the screenings that are happening there's one in DC coming up and one in New York of the Ariel School Phenomenon film? Are you going to be involved in any of those?
Yes, I'll be going to the one in DC.
And what's the date on that?
I believe it's if I'm right, the 3rd of May.
May. Yep,
Yeah,
that's what I remembered, something like that. Yeah. So
yeah,
yeah, that should be interesting. There's a few
yeah,
of those going on. Yeah.
yeah. That's the 3rd of May. That's correct.
And I should say before we move on from that, um, did you think the movie was as beautiful as I thought it was?
Oh
Beautifully
yeah,
done.
it
Yeah.
was it was very emotional, because
Yes,
it just brought back a lot of memories
I bet.
of what happened and the people involved. Sadly, Cynthia and Tim are not around anymore.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, Tim, I know. Yeah, I heard that. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I
But
mean, I can tell you some interesting things that while Tim was involved in it initially, um, he was obviously doing the filming it to send back to the BBC in London at the time.
yeah,
And in those days, everything was kind of tape couriered to the UK,
yeah,
and
yeah.
usually I think it went via Johannesburg. And I phoned him up once to find out um, about the tape, and he said, "Oh yes, the tape." And he talked about he had some encounters, well, with agencies with 3 letters, shall I say, that were interfering with the tape.
Really?
Get,
Like,
getting to
did the tape make it?
Yes, I did make it to the BBC, but because I'll tell you what, Tim and I and the 2 kids that were showing us, this is Guy and Farai here, they were taking us around.
Hmm.
And while we were talking to them and they were pointing out, we saw, interestingly, a very bright light
Uh-huh.
on a hill at the back. And initially we just thought maybe it's just a reflection of um, the zinc roofing, the metal roofing that some of the little houses that some of the local people build their homes with,
Hmm.
in Zimbabwe. And we thought it was just reflection of the sunlight. And when I went back to look at the grounds more carefully, there was actually nothing there. There was absolutely nothing there to indicate that there was something that would cause that light to be shining that day we were there.
Ah,
So Cynthia and I used to make a joke that, oh, they were watching us or something like that.
yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway, I asked Tim about it. Did he catch it on tape? And he said to me he got it on tape, but that part of the tape disappeared, showing that light.
Huh.
So
Jeez.
yeah. So I was asking a favor from a journalist locally if he could track the original tape that was sent to the BBC, hoping that maybe we could find something out.
Hmm.
But yeah, there are some interesting things happening with Tim and he got very intrigued about the whole incident. He was a bit like, he just said to me, just be careful.
Didn't he basically say that it was a career ender, something like that?
He didn't say that to me. Maybe he was saying it to other people, but I know it generally at the time, just with Cynthia and her investigations, a lot of people would only come to her privately, like, let's say, pilots. They would always be anonymous. They would never want to be named in her reports,
Mm-hmm.
because
Well,
of the stigma.
now I know there was, um, I don't know if you want to call it debunkers but they were talking about, something that entered the atmosphere and, it had to be this, had to be that. But there was a lot of things going on within several days.
That's right. Well, if I can just rehash on some of the events, like on Wednesday, the 14th of September, there was what we described as a pyrotechnic display in the sky of Zimbabwe. It was actually going over Zambia, Zimbabwe, maybe all the way down to Botswana. It was going all the way from the north to the south. And
Hmm.
this light, people describe it as like a very large object in front and lots of smaller objects behind it. And there's a long flame-like trail behind the sparkling trail behind us.
Hmm.
So people assumed it was maybe, there were reports of, oh, it's a plane falling down, on fire. Or it was meteorite shower of some sort, maybe a piece of meteor came in, broke up, and the main body and pieces of the meteor were flying. And then we had, Cynthia believed it might have been a Soviet rocket launch, and the nose cone had been ejected and came through the atmosphere a few days later, apparently,
Mm-hmm.
causing this event. But that's all I know about that.
Hmm.
And then, of course, after that, it was widely reported in the newspaper and the TV at the time. And then, like I mentioned, on the Thursday, the kids then saw the cigar-shaped object flying
Hmm.
by the school, with a blinking red light of some sort. And then Friday was the main event where, when all the kids were out, they saw the object coming down to land.
Yeah. Um, Here's a question that I don't know the answer to. Did anyone actually see the craft or crafts, plural, leave?
I remember Tim Leach was interviewing some of the kids, and he asked them, where did it go? How did it go? And the kid said it just lifted off the excuse me, lifted off the ground a little bit and just went. And he said, went where? Did it just go over there or whatever? And they were kind of like finding it difficult to describe how it went. And even Tim, I didn't think, caught on to the subtleties of that when I watched that. And it's almost like they were saying it just disappeared. Just, they just said it just went. They didn't say it flew off over there or over that way. It just went. In other words, it disappeared. Just lifted
Yeah,
up and disappeared.
isn't that's crazy? Um, let's see. This is I usually ask people to put their questions in caps, but I happen to catch this one. Has anyone traveled through rural Africa looking for similar sightings that may not have been talked about outside of their local areas? Did Cynthia do that because she was so involved in writing that book?
Yes, she had, obviously, she wrote this book, and the one, this one here, she was actually finishing this book, the second book, UFOs of Africa. And just when she was finishing it, the Ariel event happened.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, there's a case called, if I remember right, it's La Rochelle. It's a town in the eastern highlands of Zimbabwe, and there's like a missionary retreat area there. Very beautiful. And some of the local people who worked around the missionary saw this ball of fire rolling across the lawn of this place. Large ball. And this ball rolled up the tower, went into the room up at the top of the tower, burst into flames, reconstituted, rolled down, and then it opened up, and there was, if I remember, a being standing there. And one of the people ran up to say, "Oh, what's going on?" It's confused. And when the being turned around, he thought it was one of the managers standing there, but it wasn't the manager, because when this person turned around to face him, there was this bright light coming from his head like a torch, extremely bright. It was so bright that he fell to the ground and looked down. And when he looked up again, this beam was gone.
Jeez, that's a crazy one. I love crazy ones like that.
That was just bizarre, actually. This ball of light rolling up the building wall, but it didn't actually scorch or burn anything, And then we had, what other cases? There's an interesting case in one of Cynthia's older ones, which is the Peter and Francis trip to South Africa. That was still in the 70s. They were driving from Harare all the way to South Africa. And on their trip, they encountered a UFO. They saw a UFO. And during that time, they saw it several times, actually. When they passed, they put fuel in the car. And as they left this town, the UFO came back. And they were always looking out the window in fear, what was going on. And they had this feeling that something happened to them. They couldn't explain, like they had some kind of missing time.
Oh.
So, and when they got to the border to South Africa, and they decided to put some petrol in the car was full. The fuel they filled in hundreds of kilometers was still in there. So they had hardly moved. So they couldn't understand why that happened.
Jeez.
So in South Africa, where they were staying, Cynthia got them to, she asked for if they could have a hypnotist regress them to find out what happened. And now the hypnotist was a total skeptic. They didn't, it wasn't like a UFO investigator hypnotist or anything. It was just a normal hypnotist. And when they took them back to the event, they described their car being taken up into the craft, and somehow they were putting some kind of simulator to simulate the environment around them. So, but the environment looked a bit too lush, like almost jungle wet, looked a bit strange to what they expected. So they were kind of like, I don't know, they were like test subjects, if I may put it that way. But so they asked them, what do they want from you? Why did they do this? They said they were wanting to find out about a UFO case he encountered years ago. So this person who was telling Cynthia about this case, the UFO was actually trying to find out about a case they were involved in years ago. And so they asked, did you see a UFO at that time? And he said, yes, when he was younger, he was driving around a corner and there was a UFO hovering above the road, and he put on the brakes, and then the UFO shot off, but it embedded some kind of material in his car when it shot off, marked his car. So somehow whoever these creatures are, were kind of interested in this other UFO he encountered. So the hypnotist asked, how do they travel, things like that, and they said they don't travel like linearly. They travel in time, you know.
Yeah, there's some type of time thing
It's
going on.
it's
Seems.
almost like time for them is a destination to get to. They say they like go back in time, then forward in time. So they use time like to get to something closer. They go back in time, or
It
something like
seems.
that.
It seems like I'm hearing more and more things like that for and different people I talk to. A couple of things I can't believe where I know it's very early in the morning for you there, so we're not going to be going longer than just a few more minutes here. But someone wanted to know if any of Cynthia's books are available in North America. Would you know that? I know you live in England. So.
I have seen some of her UFOs over Africa out in on Amazon, I believe.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But this book is extremely rare.
Yeah.
So I do have a couple of them, but I just keep them as like gold, basically.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And then I like this question here because I don't think I've ever asked this of anyone I've interviewed of any of the kids, but have any of them ever reported further encounters later on in life that you're aware of?
No, I haven't heard of any of the kids telling me that. I
Yeah.
mean, at least I know one of the children who lives in the UK, Lisa. She's in the
Yeah.
UK, so but I haven't managed to speak to her directly yet. I know sometimes I like to keep them in their personal environment because sometimes they get hounded by people if they
Yes.
get to know them. So I don't want to interfere. But I'll probably, once they get comfortable with me, I might be able to speak to them. Because I remember speaking to Francis. He agreed to speak to me and he wanted to. I asked him if he would be willing to speak on a program, which he said yes at first, but then he didn't want to be involved later on. He just found it overwhelming, you know.
Yes. Yeah. I had Francis on once and then tried to get him back again. And yeah, he does go through those phases where it is overwhelming for him.
Yeah,
So we're at the end already. I can't believe how quickly that went with you.
I
And I'd
know.
like to invite you to come back again at another time if you would.
No, that would be a pleasure, Martin, definitely.
Yes. Thanks so much.
No problem.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye. All right, everyone. So we'll be back next week with Mike Clellan. That should be a funner interview with him. He's been on before. And I guess that's about it. We'll see you next week. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.